Damaged Defenders by Sherza. Chapter 80. Soldier and Loki. Having made Steve his mission, Soldier was determined not to leave Steve's side. But sticking so close to him was a comfort, the only stable thing in Soldier's rapidly changing world. Didn't signify. At least Soldier didn't let himself think about that part of it. His wants and needs did not figure into anything. They hadn't since he'd become Soldier. All too often, any expressed want or need had been used against him, so he learned not to think about that sort of thing in the rare moments he'd been able to think at all. At least now he knew he hadn't always been this way, that once upon a time he'd been a person, and that maybe he'd be a person again someday. Certainly the Avengers didn't seem to have any desire to quash his increasing awareness. They'd not once denied him necessities like food and water. They'd not once even attempted to hurt him out of malice. Sure, Thor pounded on him, but that had been in an attempt to capture him, not because Thor just felt like pounding on him. All he had to do was not fall back into their hands. Just thinking about that made him want to hide in a corner, preferably with as many weapons as he could get his hands on. Not that he was entirely sure he'd actually be able to shoot them if they showed their faces. They'd done their damnedest to train that out of them. The weapons just being present would be a bit comforting, even if he never used them. There were two good things about sticking close to Steve. For one, he heard everything the Avengers talked about. If not immediately, then quickly enough as the discussion made the rounds of the group. The other good thing was that because everyone was bouncing in and out of Steve's orbit, he got a good look at how they worked together, and which of the lot he could trust to have Steve's back if he went down. Not that he intended to, but plans had to be made. Romanov made him twitchy as hell. He knew she went rogue, but he couldn't quite keep himself from giving her the stink eye every time she got anywhere near Steve. Rogue or no, she was still dangerous, and independent agents could be bought or suborned. Worse, with her training, they wouldn't know she'd been bought or suborned until they were dead. Stark. Soldier didn't know why, but something kept telling him the guy was good for at least munitions and supply support. The suit. Well, Soldier hadn't seen that in action enough to know its capabilities or how reliable Stark was in combat. Thor and Loki? Definitely suitable support for Steve. But Thor couldn't smash. Loki could, do whatever the heck that green gold stuff was, too. Banner he wanted as far from Steve as he could get. Soldier hadn't seen the monster personally, but the briefing from them indicated the thing could make a smear of Steve without half trying, and had a tendency to smash everything in sight when it showed up. Barton? Soldier didn't know what to think. On the one hand, the guy apparently never missed. On the other, arrows. Bullets were much, much better. More reliable. Such a quirk would never have been permitted by them. Which, in its own way, just recommended the Avengers all the more, that they let the guy have such a quirk, that they actually catered to it, if a brief discussion of specialty arrowheads he'd overheard was any indication. The others hadn't been in the brief he'd been given by them, so Soldier knew little to nothing about any of them to decide if they were suitable backup for Steve. Well, he'd keep watching. Then he overheard a conversation that indicated Steve, Stark, Thor, and Loki were going to split off from the Avengers and, do something. He did not understand part of the discussion, and they were going to send him back to Earth with the others. Steve had clearly been torn about that, which was really all the impetus Soldier had needed. He couldn't do his mission if Steve wasn't present. Still, he waited until it was just the two of them. He trusted Steve, but he had no idea how the others would react if he seemed to get argumentative. Besides, it was easier trying to wrangle just Steve. Weirdly, it felt like something he'd done before, even if he couldn't remember it. While it was a relief to remember something, Soldier was left wishing he remembered, not all of it. If he never remembered his time in their hands clearly, he wouldn't complain. But the stuff prior to that? He really kind of wanted to remember all of it, because the bits he'd gotten were incomplete and driving him nuts! And at least communicating, to a certain degree, mission-relevant data was less of a problem than talking in general. Soldier caught Steve's eye and made several gestures. It was the military hand sign equivalent of, "You are not going off on your own, you idiots," with Soldier's expression conveying the "you idiot" part of the equation. Then, more emphatically, came the equivalent of, "I am going to be watching your back, whether you like it or not." Again, the soldier's expression conveying the "whether you like it or not" parts. Soldier didn't realize it, but he was instinctively using signs that Steve would recognize rather than the more modern equivalents that had been codified well after Steve had gone down in the ice. Steve gave him a look that Soldier didn't quite know how to parse. "But, Soldier," Steve said, "you can't. I wish you could, but it's just not an option. We're going to be doing a lot of talking and politicking. People might take it poorly that you're not talking to them." Soldier gave Steve a look that very plainly said, "Tough luck," before reiterating, "I am going with you, you idiot," in sign and expression. Then, because Steve was not buying a clue, he actually spoke. "Mission protect." Steve choked and went wide-eyed. Then apparently he got over the surprise of Soldier talking and figured out what Soldier had meant because he started getting distinctly teary-eyed. "Protect me, you mean?" he said, voice rough with emotion Soldier didn't quite know how to quantify. Soldier nodded, then repeated the "going with you" signs, giving Steve a mulish look at the same time. Steve pulled himself back together and cocked an eyebrow at Soldier. "Can you even deal with weapons right now to act as my protection?" he asked. Soldier just lifted his metal hand and curled it into a fist. The message clear. Who needed weapons when he could just punch anyone idiot enough to try something? "We're gonna have to talk to the others," Steve said. "But as long as they don't have a problem..." Soldier couldn't quite keep the smirk of success off his face. It very quickly fell off when he turned away and realized they hadn't been quite as alone as he thought. At some point in the discussion, the Batswoman had come by. She was standing near the door, watching the two of them with her eyebrows well up. "Well, at least if there's a problem, there won't be a problem keeping things under control," she said. "And it's probably for the best he not go back to Earth right away anyway. The odds of whoever had him eventually trying to get him back are high. The more time he has to deal with the damage they did before that happens, the better." "Yeah," Steve said. "I was kind of thinking along the same lines myself." Loki would say this much for certain Asgardian troublemakers. They had wit enough to wait until the odds were more in their favor. The odds were still extremely poor. Loki could have told them that. He didn't yet trust it to last, but for the time being, Thor had pulled his great golden head out of his posterior and was both paying attention and willing to clout anyone that troubled Loki. It was quite a pleasant state of affairs, but also quite disconcerting. Loki had long wished that Thor would grow up. He had not put any great thought into what a mature Thor would be like, save for being less prone to injured ego-driven tantrums. In the past weeks, Loki had had the privilege to catch glimpses of the king Thor would eventually become, and Thor was bidding fair to become that king far quicker than Loki had dared hope. At any rate, Loki could have told the troublemakers that even with most of the Midgardians returned to their realm, the odds of them getting away with their usual schemes were dismal. Odin may have ignored people treating Loki ill and thereby encouraged such behavior, but Frigga and Thor were not so inclined, nor were Stephen and Tony. At least it hadn't been the Warriors 3 that had decided to taunt Loki. That would have gotten exceedingly messy on all sides. No, it was a quartet of young men, all in the same age range as Thor, Loki, Sif, Fandral, and Hogun. They were all sons of high-ranked courtiers and soldiers. As such, all four of them fancied themselves proper boon companions to the Crown Prince. Had Thor actually been a more traditional Crown Prince, they may well even have been his boon companions. But Thor, despite excelling at traditional proper pastimes for an Asgardian prince, had rather eclectic tastes when it came to his boon companions. None of the quartet had taken it well when Thor had passed them by in favor of a woman, a native of Vanir, Hogan, and Volstagg, who was both older and did not present the proper appearance of an Asgardian warrior, thanks to his rather rotund stomach and love of food and drink. Oh, and don't forget Loki himself. Loki kept company with Thor, rather than gather his own company of lesser personages suitable to accompany the second prince. Worse, he employed both magic and long-distance weaponry as a matter of course in battle, rather than using sword and spear, as was proper. They had even criticized Fandral for his interest in his appearance. As Fandral was otherwise an exemplary Asgardian warrior, he came in for less harassment than the rest of the group, but that wasn't saying much. One of the men, Dolphin, had made a pastime out of harassing Sif every chance he got, though he'd been wise enough to never do so in Thor's sight. The cretin had still to realize that he could lay many of his misfortunes at Loki's feet. Loki and Sif had never gotten along well, but Loki had been all too happy to punish Dolphin's effrontery in Thor's stead whenever he caught the man harassing Sif. Sif had forbade them all to interfere, but thanks to his magic, Loki was able to punish Dolphin with her none the wiser. As befit the quartet's usual behavior, they waited until Thor had absented himself from Loki's company in order to make final arrangements for their tour of the realms before they made their approach. Stephen was in the quarters he and Sergeant Barnes had been given, with Sergeant Barnes. Loki had taken it upon himself to show Tony a few things about Asgard that Thor would not have thought to show off. Being a man of great intelligence and insatiable curiosity himself, Loki had a fair idea of what would appeal to Tony. Loki had had every intention of putting the quartet in their place, but much to his amazed amusement, he had not had to. Tony had launched one of his verbal offenses. Between the speed at which he spoke and the terminology he used, he left the four bewildered but nevertheless aware that Tony had taken offense at their mockery of Loki. Interestingly, Loki had a suspicion that Tony had discovered fighting somewhere. He hadn't rhymed everything, but he'd gotten a fair few rhymes in, enough to make it clear that's what he was doing. Loki was delighted. He'd known, of course, that Tony was as near to being his equal in snark and smartassery as it was probably possible to get. They'd gotten into a few snark wars over the last few weeks, all in the name of fun. This, though, was the first time he'd spotted Tony deliberately attempting to make things rhyme. Loki could hardly wait to teach Tony the finer points of fighting. It was going to be so much fun. Things might have gotten a bit sticky at that point. The quartet wouldn't have taken Tony's mockery at all well. Loki, however, stepped in as he'd planned to do before Tony had a go at them. He gave the four a flat glare and let his magic shimmer green-gold around his hands. The four immediately started to look ill at ease and cast about for an easy escape from their predicament. You dare to mock, yet see how curs cower at the first show of power they can neither possess nor defeat. Begone before you test my temper further, he snapped. Wisely, they got. Once they were gone, Loki cocked an eyebrow at Tony. And pray tell, when was I going to discover that you were learning to flight? Tony grinned at him. Well, I'd hoped to wait until I was better at it. It's surprisingly challenging to put things together so they rhyme all the way through a good insult. I shall have to give you a few pointers, Loki said. You didn't do all that badly for a first public attempt, especially as flighting does not exist as such on Midgard, and it has been quite a while since I had an opponent who could keep up with me. Mother can, but she rarely indulges in such crass entertainments.